former East Coaster.
Yay!
He's been with the tradition many years, and he recently published a new book, Reclaiming Your Sacred Path. He was a guest on the Peggy Shine Show. You all want to listen to that the third Friday of every month, except for last night. And it is with great pleasure that we have Jon with us tonight, this afternoon. And welcome, Jon Martin Anastasio.
Thanks, Mike. So, I think it was about 1981. I was, no, actually, sorry, it was 1978. I was at a place called Taganik Falls in Ithaca, New York. And I believe it's, at least for the East Coast, the tallest waterfall around. But if you know Ithaca at all, it's known for gorges, right? These deep clefts between the mountains. And I was standing in the parking lot with my wife and a couple of other couples we were with, and my daughter at the time was about 3 years old. And I happened to just glance over and notice that about as far as the table from me, she was walking on this retaining wall at the side of the parking lot. And I looked, and I didn't think anything of it. I saw the trees behind her, and there was the moment when I realized that I wasn't looking at trees that were like this high. I was looking at the tops of 60-foot evergreens.
Oh my.
Right, so you just got that, right? So, and I looked, and what's your natural instinct?
Run backwards.
Run and grab it. It was like, and at that moment, what was my goal there?
Get her down.
To get her down safely, make sure nothing happened. She didn't go that way, she came this way. So I just kind of walked over about like this, and I went as quickly as I could. In my mind, I was running. And I got over here, and I just kind of picked her up, and I put her down, and I grabbed her hand, and we walked over back to where everybody else was. And nobody else had, and as I was walking, people go, "Where are you going?" And they went, "Oh yeah, he's going to get Allie." And all of a sudden, I saw their faces go, and they realized the same thing. And so that moment of everything has now just changed completely. And I only have one priority, and I may not know what it is exactly, but I feel it here, and I've got to do something about it. That kind of feeling was the beginning of why I wrote the book. And so that's sort of the heart-centered place that it came from. There are so many people who experienced that moment. This morning in this incredible ritual we went through, when you all were telling your stories of what the tradition means to you, a lot of you were talking about the thing that awakened you to the fact that this is where you wanted to be, right? I mean, we've all got that story. Do you remember that moment when you said, I don't know what it is I'm looking for, but I know it's out there and I got to go get it. I got to go find it. That's what this book is for. It actually, just logistically, it's very interesting. Lady Wendy was the first person who ever laid eyes on any of the content of this, because this book actually came out of my second degree project, which I had decided that I was really taken with divination, with runes particularly, and with tarot, and I decided to use the runes and the tarot and the I Ching as the focus for a beginning guide to divination, which of course, the world needs one more beginner's guide to divination. So, but it was a little bit different. It was that I realized the thing that I had known about Wicca for a very long time, and I had always avoided it. And before and I also, the same thing, by the way, with Reiki. I know therapeutic touch, I don't need Reiki. It's the same thing. Well, not exactly. But I had avoided Wicca, and I thought, well, that's because Wicca doesn't make sense. No, that's because I had some kind of internal obstacle. That was, if something comes up in my life 3 times, I have a rule, I have to go pursue it. I have to go find out what it's all about. And so, but I realized that most of the obstacles, as I began to pursue that path, most of the obstacles that were facing me were internal. Really, all of them were internal. And so, the book really comes out of not so much how does divination work, but divination and manifestation tools that we're all familiar with are the sort of basic skills that are in there that can be used in a process of finding your own spiritual answer. Because the real, what was the statement about what Lord Don said in the vlog about if somebody's telling you this is the right way and the only way and you can't do it any other way, run. The whole purpose of this is to allow people who've been living under systems like that, or who have felt they were constrained like that, to be able to experience their own spiritual autonomy, to go using divination, get your own spiritual information. Test it against reality. Does it work? Does it prove valid? If not, try something else, but trust yourself. Develop your own autonomous relationship with spirit. And to then be able to say, okay, now that I've gotten that information and I know what answer feels right to me, what am I going to do to help myself make it happen? And we all know spell work, we all know candle magic, we all know the things that we do in order to focus and direct our intention toward an outcome. Recognizing our responsibility to the law of three, recognizing our responsibility to the reed, and that all of these things that we do have to be towards some objective, have to be towards some intention. And so I had wandered for decades through Native American spirituality, The Course in Miracles, through shamanism with Michael Harner, the guy who wrote The Way of the Shaman, took his class in divination and shamanism. This is just like on and on and on and on. And that was after having been a Catholic for 18 years and finding out that that didn't actually work for people, for anybody, for a lot of people. And being a Baha'i for 13 years, and being a member of religion for a long time, each of which had its code of conduct that said, do it this way, or something bad will happen. And so I said, well, but I don't buy that. So anyway, so come to my second degree project. And I write this book not so much about divination as about how to overcome your own internal obstacle to recognizing you're an autonomous spiritual being with the responsibility to find your own spiritual path, pursue it, and establish your own independent relationship with people. And so rather than browse through metaphysical bookstores for 20 or 30 years like I did, and finding things like that way, browsing through what's available, basically this sets out a process I'm going to ask you to actually use today. Now, we're all here, we're all on a path, right? We're members of this tradition, and we have found this, however we execute it in our lives, we have this set of guiding principles, we have a path that we're following, and yet we're all still here, which means we haven't yet completed the lessons that we came here to learn. And so we're going to do a little work with the basic process in this book, recognizing that, this is I intended this for everybody from someone who's coming out of a very controlling, dogmatic system and is really actually terrified of finding out that they are independent and pursuing spirituality, doesn't know what to do next, doesn't want to make mistakes, to people who really are saying, okay, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do tomorrow to take myself further along my path? So that was my project for the second degree, was to take divination and demystify it, to make it not scary, to make it simpler, make the learning process simple, so that, for example, in the Charge of the Goddess, where we talk about mirth and reverence, where she talks about mirth and reverence, that those two things can coexist. You can be very reverent in the work that we do, but also at the same time have fun with it and give yourself a break in terms of making mistakes. And so that was the intention of that. And all of a sudden, I started thinking about it, and it was almost as though I didn't have a choice. It had to become something. It had to become the book, right? Because the whole learning process is one that I thought might be helpful for people who are having trouble getting started, getting restarted, or feeling kind of wobbly, and I wanted there to be a resource for them. So, you remember when before you got to Lustration, Reverend Laurie sent out a message to all of us. Do you remember that? Yeah. What did she say? Yeah, what do you want to get out of the weekend? Not just what do you want to do, because there's going to be all the socializing and all of the fun and all of the activities and all of that, and that can be that's very compelling. But really, spiritually, what's your objective of being? What's the thing you want to take away from this? How do you want to grow in this experience this weekend? And as I thought about that, it was interesting because it was an unexpected question for me. It was a great question, and I realized that I tend to live in my upper chakras, right? It's a lot of intellectual stuff, a lot of perceptual stuff, and I realized that for me the answer was I want to drop down here. That's why I want to be with you this weekend. I want to have that experience of really moving this work into my heart center. And so what I'd like you to do is, did you think about it when she asked you the question?
Yeah.
Something come to your mind? Okay, this handout is one that I use when I talk about the book, like when I go to bookstores and things like that. And what I'd like you to do is to take this, and if you have a pen, or if you just want to think about it, what was that thing that you hope you're going to take out of this weekend? Just do some more thinking about that, and if you can, make some notes to yourself, write it down.
Anyone need a pen? He needs a hand.
Oh, thank you.
Have any more handouts?
We have a few over here, if you need some.
You need a handout?
Yes, I have a few over here. Thank you. Rory made us do this originally.
So let me ask you, for how many of you is this something new? For a few people, it's something. Other people, it's something you thought of before? It's been on your mind before? It's something maybe you've been working on? So what I'd like you to do is, if you've got some notes there, the first part of this, so the difference between the first step in this process that I'm talking about is really being able to create a vision, a picture in your mind of what's going to be different if you actually if you get to the end of this weekend and you've achieved that thing, you've acquired it, you've done it, it's accomplished, you're on the road to it. What's that going to look like? How is it going to change your life? What's going to be different about the things that you do? And about how you participate in the various aspects of your life. Does that make sense? That's the beginning part of this, is to really be able to say, this is where I want it to go. And as I started thinking through the, I think I've told a few of you that my first exposure to Wicca really was the book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Wicca and Witchcraft. And I found it when I was actually at a very low point in my life, which was about 2008. Things had gone sideways in a lot of different ways. And I actually looked at it and I said, I've dabbled in spirituality for a long time, but what if I actually really tried to do this? What if I actually took this book and worked all the way through it and did everything the way it's supposed to be done? And the short form of the story is, after having done that, I started looking around for other resources, and the first resource I found online was Witch School. And that's how I came to the tradition. And I worked through living the Wiccan life in my first year. Lady Wendy was my mentor for that. And went through the degree programs over the next few years. And as I learned, when I put together what I learned through that experience with taking this thing I just asked you to do to the next level, the notion is, if you look at the front of your handout, there's a three-part process there that I talk about in the book. That also is when I work with folks back at home, talking about, first of all, once there's something that you want to accomplish, so you have this vision for how you want things to be different. You have the skills. You don't need the middle of this book, right? You have the skills of divination. You have the skills of manifestation. The idea is to then say, okay, I've got targeted questions now. So for example, from a shamanic journey perspective, what I would basically be asking if I were journeying on what I said I wanted to get out of this weekend, I would be saying, I would be journeying probably to the upper world shamanically, and I'd be saying, so help me, what is it that I need to know in order to be more heart-centered? and I would go and I would ask my spirit guides that question. That would be the divination aspect of this process, to say, I know what I want, I know what I want to accomplish. I know what I want it to look like, feel like, so what is my next step? And asking spirit for guidance and information about how to accomplish that. Then then saying, okay, so what am I going to do about it? And that's the manifestation aspect, and that's the mundane work I have to do, that's the psychological work I have to do, it's the spiritual work that I have to do, and the spell work and ritual that I can use to support myself in accomplishing that objective. Right? And so, a lot of times, that's where we stop. We do divination, we start doing and doing and doing and doing and doing, and we burn out. And that's why the third piece of the pie here, the third section of this process is healing. And particularly, how many of you are healers in some way? You do energy healing, other forms of healing, verbal healing. Yeah, and I hope that you are getting as much healing as you need to be replenished in the process of giving the healing that you give. Because if you're just doing and you don't replenish, you don't recover, it's like building a muscle. When you work out, your muscles are not built during the exercise. Your muscles are built during the rest period in between exercises. And so it becomes really important to make sure that you replenish it. And so does everybody do that? Does everybody buy that? Does that make sense? So the idea is you create this vision. You say, what is it that's driving me? There's a reason that I came here. There's a reason that the thing that popped into my head about what I wanted to get out of this weekend came to me. And that's what's driving me in terms of what you see in this handout. The next piece is, what's it going to look like when I have that operating in my life? And the third piece I would say is really about, so what's stopping me from accomplishing it? And so let me just throw it out to people. When you think about the things that tend to, the obstacles you have experienced in the past, as you've gotten to where you are today, and what you see ahead of you that might stop you from doing, what are the things that might stop you from doing what you want to do? That you just want? Fear?
Yeah.
Fear of?
Shy.
Say again?
Being shy.
Being shy? Okay. What else?
Where to start?
Need to get out of your own way. Sorry?
Where to start?
Where to start? Okay. Huh? Money. Okay. Afraid that you're not doing it right. Yeah. Yeah, I think in some way or another, and we actually, fear in some way gets into a lot of this conversation. There's a whole bunch of kinds of fear. But the key are things that we become afraid of. And the interesting part of this is that if you look at resistance, and that's what's on the top right of this, the inside of the handout, is to look at the things that stop you and to think about how you could reframe that. One of the things that, when I took my motorcycle safety class, one of the principles they talked about was that speed stabilizes the bike. And that works for motorcycles and bicycles and anything that tends to be tippy, right? And the idea that once you get going, the machine is built to stabilize and to be very, very solid and to be very secure on the road. And it came to me that it was the same issue with spirit, that we have to, the question about what to do first, what to do next. I think the answer is pick the next thing that makes sense to you. That's where you go to divination. Say, what is the next best thing for me to do? Get guidance from spirit to ask that question, and then trust that answer and do it. Because once you're in motion, spirit can help you. But if you're not in motion, it's a lot harder to invoke that guidance, right? If you're not doing anything, it's really hard to get that kind of help. So I think the first thing is to get divinatory information, and then say, okay, based on what I just heard, I know what I need to do next, build next, and then I'm going to get to work. I'm going to get to work on it. And as I find myself feeling depleted and confused, I'm going to go get some healing. I'm going to focus on my own healing. Whether if you're a Reiki practitioner, you're doing self-healing, or if you're going and getting help from someone else. So let me just stop here and ask if you have any questions. If this is making sense. Questions? Thoughts? What's it making you think of? Mhm. How so? Did you hear what Liz said? She said it's making me think of shadow work.
Well, it's like consulting spirit, like what do I have to do to fix what,
Mhm.
you know, what are my obstacles?
Right.
What's getting in my way?
Mhm.
What do I have to change? To
Yeah.
get moving on my motorcycle.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I guess there's two aspects, there's two ways to look at it. One is, how do I get information about what's blocking me? And then for the things I know are blocking me, how can I get information to help me work through that, right? So it's both things, because sometimes we know perfectly well. And, you know, I'll have these conversations, I'll run workshops based on this, and I'll have people working through it, and when they say, well, these are the things that are blocking me, I say, well, how long has that been blocking you? Well, how long have you known about it? Well, for a long time. So, okay, so now what? So then the answer is, well, what's stopping you from resolving that, right? And as you unpack, it is very much like shadow work. And in fact, on the last chat, we actually had that exchange about, you know, simultaneously, this subject came up about blockages, and simultaneously, Reverend Don said shadow work, and I typed fear of releasing fear. And it was, you know, we said it's the same thing, right? And it's, but that's how you release fear, right? You have to do the shadow work, and that's where the resistance piece comes in. So the process, and now I'm also talking to you partly as folks who teach people this stuff, right? That this is a process you can use with people to basically say, let's really talk about where you see yourself going, and what is it that's going to look like when you get there, and then let's build your skills, make you an autonomous spiritual being. You can get your own information, act on your own information, you can get healing for what faces you, and it becomes not a circle, but it's a spiral, right? It's the same process, but each time you go around, you're getting stronger. And then looking at resistance and saying, okay, when we come up, the interesting thing about resistance, there's a great book called The War of Art by a guy named Stephen Pressfield. It's a book about how to overcome the blocks to creativity. And really, I think he wrote it because he was having writer's block. He's an author. And he wrote it to get out of writer's block, because the only solution to writer's block is to write. So, but it's an incredible book. And he talks about the fact that resistance only comes up when you're at your edges. You know, your ego will leave you alone about everything. You'll have a perfectly happy, placid existence until you actually start to push the edges of growth. And the ego's not going to like that, right? Because the ego likes to preserve status quo. And so when you find yourself resisting, it means you're onto something important. And then it's even more important to do the shadow work and to do the work of resolving that resistance. And so that's the next piece of it. And the last piece of the book itself is about creating a plan. And it's taking all of these things and saying, so what are you actually now going to do next in terms of building your skills around divination, manifestation, and healing, and using those skills to get where you're trying to go. And the thing I tried to do was create something where you say, okay, you work through it once, and you get there, and all of a sudden you find yourself in that spot again, right? And you say, what do I do? Well, pick up a book. Or pick up the process, which you actually have in this handout, right? That basically says, I start over again. I say, what's stopping me? Where is it I want to go from here? Because I'm now in a new place. And you can just run it all over again. Does that make sense? So I would ask you, as whatever you wrote down there, think about how can you use what you know of divination and manifestation techniques and healing tools to help you achieve what you just wrote down, or what you just thought about, what you came into this weekend hoping to accomplish for yourself. And basically use what you know to set a new agenda for yourself around that particular subject in a sort of structured, organized way. So, that's it. What do you think? I want to read you something that I periodically test myself against this. Say it again? Periodically. whenever I start feeling sorry for myself, which can vary. But I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. It's called An Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Portia Nelson. Does this sound familiar? Okay. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it's there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down a different street. So that's the vision piece. So thank you. That'll do it for me, unless you have questions.